You only need to know 3 techniques if you want to draw realistic eyes like these. I'm going to share with you these 3 techniques in under 10 minutes to create a realistic eye. I'm going to be using pastel pencils and velour paper, but you can just use normal paper and a HB pencil. So make sure your pencils are sharp and let's get started. Okay, so I start the timer and I'm going to do this within 10 minutes. So we want to start off with a vertical and horizontal line. And you want to do this whether you're drawing an animal or a human eye. The reason being, we're going to be picking out lines, not curves at the start, as you can see here. So I'm looking at my reference photo and I'm basically starting to pick out the biggest structures that I can see. So on this one, helpfully, we do have 2 diagonals that I put in. And then I'm starting to work on where the eyeball itself is going, where the eyelids are. But once more, look how I'm sketching this out. I'm looking for angles and I'm constantly referring to my vertical and my horizontal. So when I look at my reference photo, when I'm trying to figure out the angle of a line, I'm comparing it to a vertical and a horizontal. So you could put a cross on your reference photo, or in fact a grid, if that helps you. I can kind of imagine it on mine, but for a beginner, especially if you put a grid on it, it can really help you with the accuracy of your lines and therefore your overall pet portrait, if that's what you're working towards. So I'm picking out the biggest structures. The dark areas on this are really easy to see quite clearly, and once more, still working in lines. And you do this for a human eye as well. So adding in the structures around the eye, like that section there, this is going to help build the eye socket. And I'm going to talk to you quite a bit about the eye socket later on because it is very important. Once I've done that, I've just picked up the KOH-I-NOOR black, which is a black pencil I particularly like, and I'm starting to sketch in what's happening inside the eyeball. So obviously we're going to have an iris, we're going to have a pupil and the reflection, but the line I've just put across there, this is for a really deep shadow, which I've gone straight in with. So again, you would want to do this on a human eye too, but to make sure that the eye is sat inside the eye socket and underneath the eyelids, we need to give it a realistic shadow that is being cast by the upper lid. Now, unless you've got unusual lighting, there will be a shadow cast by the upper lid. In this case, what I've done, and what I would advise that any pet portrait artist do, is to actually intensify that shadow. I've made it much bigger than it is on the reference photo. This increases the depth that we get in our drawing. It makes the eye study feel far more 3D. And if you go and have a look online at other pet portrait artists, you'll see a lot of people doing this. And this is effectively that secret, in inverted commas, which a lot of people might not talk about, but you can quite clearly see in people's work, and it does work absolutely fantastically. The other thing that you need to do, and what I'm doing now, is filling in the tooth of the card entirely where it needs to be black. So I'm going around, I'm starting in the easiest areas. That was of course with the pupil, and once I've done with the eye and I've created nice soft edges where I've finished with the black, I'm starting to pick out the darkest sections around the eye, i.e. the eye socket. So you can see the deep shadows that I'm putting in. I'm basically marking them in and then starting to use the pencil a bit more lightly. I'm shading up to them, and this is going to be creating our underpainting for the fur, but most importantly, the eye socket, which is what will allow this eye to look 3D by the end. I'm working on a velour paper, and what this means is I can use one pencil, here the black, to create a variety of different tones very simply, and some really soft edges because this paper is so soft and easy to blend on. So you could be following along with this with a normal HB pencil and some white paper, and your drawing would look fairly similar to mine at this point because we are effectively just shading with a pencil. So where it's slightly lighter, I'm not pressing as hard, and you can see that starting in the darkest areas, the easiest areas to accurately pick out, I've ended up with a nice dark underpainting and an approximation of the eye socket structure as well. And the eye already feels like it's poking out from under the eyelids by creating that really dark shadow at the top that is being cast partly over the pupil but also over the iris. So the iris I usually try and make a little bit smaller than we can see in the reference photo to increase the depth. I've started here with a dark brown, it doesn't matter which dark brown you've got, and I work in really small little lines, and I'm allowing plenty of that black to show through, and I will actually add a bit more black in as well. I get a step lighter now and add a little bit more colour in with this beautiful red from Byrunzeel. And again, I'm working in small markings. As I get brighter still, you need to add fewer and fewer marks, and these markings should be directly opposite the brightest reflection, which I keep pointing to there in the eye. And this is going to give you the most amount of depth possible in your iris. So the markings are getting smaller, they're directly opposite the reflection, and I am going to make them brighter than you can see in the reference photo by here picking up the ivory from Stabilo Carbothello, the 105, and really heightening that contrast there. There's still plenty of black. You can see I'm going to add a bit more in, and the black is really gently nudging up to these colours in the iris. It's all incredibly soft. That's what you need to aim for. You need to aim for soft edges to get the maximum amount of depth, and that's where working on a velour paper with softer pastel pencils is actually easier than working on pastel matte, I would say, especially if you are a beginner, and it's all a bit cheaper to work on as well if you're just starting out and you want to practice. So I'm just going backwards and forwards a few times until I get my colours nicely balanced and until I get my transitions soft enough effectively as well. But you can see I'm picking up the lighter values of pencils and just going back in to make sure it's going to be bright enough by the end. Once I've done that, I'll head back around again with the black. I will do this right at the end of a drawing as well, but just to make sure it's nice and clean. Now, when you put a reflection in general, they're not crystal white, but I do go in with the white quite a lot, and you want to make a really sharp edge, either at the top or the bottom of the reflection. And then the other edge, you can see I'm using a grey, needs to be softer to show that it's just curving. And I will go in with the black just to help transition these. Again, this is easiest on the velour paper because the transitions are made super simple by this material. And I'm going around just cleaning up the black where there are a few spots of white, but also making the reflection ever so slightly smaller and softer at the bottom. Personally, I also like to add in just a couple more small reflections on top of the eye as well. So it's about time to leave the eyeball itself alone and we can work on the eye socket. Starting with the lids, do make sure that you pick up any soft highlights around the lids with the correct curve. We need to ensure that we're still following those angles that were apparent in your original drawing to work on the eye socket structure. I'm keeping my pencil markings super soft, and where it gets dark, I'm just allowing the pencil markings to fade away into the black. We don't want to encroach on the black too much. And if you have a dog who has got different colours of fur, you probably will still need a fair amount of black. We want to intensify the shadows around the eye and really increase the contrast. So potentially put your reference photo, if you've not got a black dog, into a photo editor and increase the contrast and increase the shadows so that you get maximum drama around the eye. So what I'm doing for this study is I'm going to give you a little bit of the snout here with some of those hairs that curve over, and I will also be giving you some of the brow, and you'll see that when these elements go in, the whole eye feels much more 3D and rounded. I'm using a KOH-I-NOOR pencil at this point, but I'm using a variety of Byrunzeel and KOH-I-NOOR. The most important thing about doing animal eyes, in particular dog's eyes for pet portraits, when you're going in with the fur, is to stop and plan out the fur direction. In general, the fur is going to fan out from the tear duct, and you can do this on some scrap paper by just giving yourself some directional basic arrows that show the direction. You can see there I'm showing you it's curving around the top of the eye. This once more is just going to be that extra layer of clarity to your drawing that helps to show that the eyeball is curved and the eye socket is also curved. So this is probably the easiest way to help get that structure in if you're struggling a little bit. I do keep picking up the black throughout this process just to make sure that my shadows are dark enough and to take them a little bit darker still where they were a little bit too grainy, and in fact I don't want to be adding more fur over the top. Where I'm adding fur over the top, in general there is less black underneath so that these markings can show up with a bit more clarity and be cleaner. So working on top of the brow, I've picked up the ivory because this is where the eye socket structure really changes, and what I'm saying there is it's bringing the structure out towards us. As that eyebrow is curved over the top, it's catching much more light. It's curving into the sun, so I'm getting lighter with my pencils, lighter with the amount of underpainting that's there, and you can see that what it's done particularly over the eye is made the shadow that we put in right at the beginning over the eyeball, is made it feel feel much deeper, and it's given it more context, it makes more sense, and it makes that eyelid on top of the eye feel very 3D and quite bulbous almost, and the eyeball has now got space to sit inside the skull. So all I'm doing in my last final few seconds of this is to add a little bit of orange to just help turn those hairs into the shadows and warm it up a little bit. And then what you always want to do at the end of any drawing is return to your lightest lights and your darkest darks, especially for an eye. We want to go back into the reflection with the white if you've used white, or a light grey if not. Make sure that they're nice, clean and crisp, and then do the same with the black, because the black will also muddy. And there you are. How to draw a realistic eye in about 10 minutes. So I've used velour paper and pastel pencils for this. And what we want to focus on is that deep shadow cast by the upper lid. We want to make sure that the blacks are well filled in, and we want to make sure that the brightest part of the iris is opposite the reflection. So these are a bunch of drawings that I did yesterday. All of these studies have been done using the same technique, creating a nice deep shadow cast by the upper brow, and then looking at where the iris, the brightest part of the iris, is going with that reflection. You can see I've worked in a variety of different breeds and angles and colours here. And this is forming part of a new course that's going to be coming to the membership. I'm going to be showing people how to do a variety of features that can help people with their pet portrait art. We want to make sure that the eyes are completely correct, because they are the most important part of any pet portrait. If you want to know more about the materials I've used, they will be linked below for you. And if you've enjoyed this short format content and you want more content like this, then please do let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to bring you more good stuff like this in the future.